Hello, good day to one and all. Poem 6 Ballad of the Tempest, written by poet James T.Fields. The poet James T.Fields describes the experiences of the sailors sailing in a ship as they go through a violent storm or tempest. It shows a constant struggle of man versus nature. Ballad of Tempest. The meaning of ballad. It is a long song or poem that tells a story in short stanzas with the emphasis on central dramatic event. Tempest, a violent storm. Reading of the poem, The Ballad of Tempest. We were crowded in the cabin. Not a soul would dare to sleep. It was midnight on the waters and a storm was on the deep. It's a fearful thing in winter to be shattered by the blast and to hear the rattling trumpet thunder cut away the mast. So we shuddered there in silence, for the stoutest held his breath, while the hungry sea was roaring and the breakers talked with death. As thus we sat in darkness, each one busy with his prayers. We are lost, the captain shouted as he staggered down the stairs. But his little daughter whispered as she took his icy hand, "Isn't God upon the ocean just the same as on the land?" Then we kissed the little maiden, and we spake in better cheer, and we anchored safe in harbour when the morn was shining clear. James T. Fields. Now the explanation with the meanings. We were crowded in the cabin. Not a soul would dare to sleep. It was midnight on the waters and a storm was on the deep. We here refers to the sailors. Cabin, a private room on a ship or boat. Once a storm broke down in the deep sea at midnight. A ship sailing in the sea was caught in the violent storm. The poet describes the situation and the condition of the sailors who were caught in the storm. Now, the speaker is one of the sailors. He says, all the sailors crowded in the cabin praying to God for their safety. Nobody dared to sleep, afraid or frightened that they would be drowned in the deep sea. Reading of the second stanza. It's a fearful thing in winter to be shattered by the blast and to hear the rattling trumpet thunder cut away the mast. TIS, it is shattered, to break apart. Mast. Mast is a flagpole in the ship that supports the sails and allows the wind to move the ship forward. This stanza tells us that the attack of the violent storm or tempest in the winter is a fearful thing because during winters the sea water is extremely cold and freezing. If they fall, they would all freeze to death. This can happen if the ship breaks apart by the terrible wind. The sailors heard the sharp, rapid noises of the trumpet and someone to cut away the mast or the violent storm shouted, "Cut away the mast." Third stanza. So we shuddered there in silence, for the stoutest held his breath, while the hungry sea was roaring and the breakers talked with death. Meaning of shuddered, to shake. Stoutest, bravest, strongest. The poet tells us that all the sailors shuddered or were very shocked and upset. They sat in silence in fear. Even the strongest and the bravest sailor held his breath in anxiety as the waves tossed, damaged the ship. Sea was roaring like a hungry lion, says the poet. He is creating an image of the sea being hungry and eating all the sailors as they fall into the sea if the ship breaks apart. Reading of the next stanza. As thus we sat in darkness, each one busy with his prayers. We are lost, the captain shouted as he staggered down the stairs. Staggered to move unsteadily. As the sailors sat in the darkness in the cabin, they were praying to God to save them. At that moment, the captain of the ship came down unsteadily the stairs. He shouted that all was lost and there was no hope of survival for them. Reading of the fifth stanza. But his little daughter whispered, as she took his icy hand, isn't God upon the ocean just as same as on the land? Icy hand, cold hand. As the captain unsteadily moved down the stairs, his little daughter came towards the father, took his cold hands, and said that the God upon the ocean wasn't the same as the God who guarded them on land. Here I would explain that the little girl tells her father, if the God who cared for them on land was not the same God who guarded the sea, the sailors got some hope and encouragement by these words of the girl. Reading of the last stanza. Then we kissed the little maiden, and we spake in cold cheer, and we anchored safe in harbour when the morn was shining clear. Here spake means spoke. The sailors who heard the girl's wise words now got renewed faith and vigor. They kissed the little girl with happiness. The sailors anchored the ship safely in the harbor. It was morning. The sky was shining very clearly. So now the storm that started in the midnight continued till the morning. The sailors anchored the ship safely and they were all safe. In this poem, the poet talks about the power of faith in God during difficulties. Fortune favors the brave. God is everywhere, but man should have faith in him. The poem also tells about the dangers faced by sailors. The faith in God who made us all saves their lives. Now about the poet, James T.Fields was born in Portsmouth, New Hampshire on 31st December 1817. He is an American publisher, editor, and a poet. He died on 24th April 1881. Thank you.